And if you're going to win souls, you've got to love souls. In spite of their meanness, in spite of the way they look, in spite of everything, you've got to seek to bring souls to Jesus Christ because you love them, because Jesus loved them, and because Jesus died for them, and you're trying to bring them to the Son of God.
Good morning and welcome to Sandy Creek Stirrings. You know, I tell you what, I have fallen in love with recording the podcast, hearing feedback from you on how things are going and if you're enjoying the podcast. And it's really been something that I feel has been effective in the lives of many. And so I want to thank you for being a listener and for joining in, for tuning in, and for listening to Sandy Creek Stirrings. This episode has been recorded at the very beginning of October, and it's been recorded during one of our first cold snaps here in Florida. And so this morning when I woke up, it was 51 degrees outside. Yes, I know, for some of you that's not very cold, but for us Floridians, that's a nice cold snap for this time of year. And so I woke up this morning singing It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas. And so I tell you what, I'm excited. I'm a big holiday guy. I love Thanksgiving. I love Christmas. And I tell you what, I just love these holidays as we move forward into them. I love the holiday times. And so I'm looking forward to everything that the holidays are going to hold. And it's going to be a wonderful time. I hope you are too. So for our episode today, we are going into Baptist history. Baptist history, of course, on Thursdays we talk about Baptist history, and we've been on a long journey so far, haven't we? We've been on a journey where we've gone through and we've looked from the time of Christ moving forward. From the time of Christ moving forward, we've followed the Baptists, we've followed their beliefs, we've followed a lot of different things, and we've come through, we've talked about the specific Baptist groups, the Donatists, the Paulicians, the Waldensians. We moved on, we talked about the Protestant Reformation, and we answered the question, are Baptists Protestants? The answer is no, Baptists are not Protestant. And so we've gone through, and I've really just enjoyed Baptist history. For me, has changed my life. It really has. It has changed my life. And so I've been so encouraged and stirred up by following the lives and the movement of the Baptists throughout history. It's been absolutely incredible. And so I'm excited for as we continue through Baptist history. Now, we just finished up in our most recent episode, we finished up the Protestant Reformation. We finished up the lives of some specific Baptists in the 15th century or the 16th century, I think some even in the 17th century. And so we're moving forward to my favorite time period during Baptist history as we move forward, as we do this study. Now, there are many other groups, many other men that we could talk about, and frankly, we're just not going to. We don't have the time right now. I'd like to get on to our next section of Baptist history. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to give you an assignment, and I want you to go and learn about a particular person. He's actually a character within Baptist history that I've really enjoyed learning about, and so I'm going to give you an assignment to learn about him. His name is Johann Oncken. Johann Oncken, Johhann is Johann, and then his last name Oncken, Onken. Johann Oncken. I want you to go and look into his life. And he was a Baptist German preacher, really a German missionary, and he did a phenomenal job for God in Germany. And I really wish we would take time to talk about him, but we're not going to. So do the study on your own and learn about him. He was a Baptist. Now, be very careful. As you do your study, remember to compare all your sources together to find out the truth. And so you can go on YouTube and type in his name and try and find some videos. Be very careful to reference anything. I'll tell you what, a video that I have found extremely useful extremely useful, and I could recommend that video to you, is if you go into YouTube and you look up Fairhaven classes. There is a college called Fairhaven, I believe it's Baptist College, and if you go in, type in Fairhaven classes into YouTube, and you search that name, Johann Onken, Fairhaven classes, Johann Onken, I believe there's a segment from their Baptist history class, and you can go in and you can listen to their segment on Johann Onken, a very in-depth section. I think it's even like 2 parts, and they did a great job with that over there at Fairhaven classes, and so you can go and listen to that segment there on Johann Onken, and they really deep dive, and a really great guy that you need to know about. But for sake of time, we're not going to go into him in our series because we are on the brink of my favorite time period moving forward into Baptist history. And so today we start off Baptist in the New World, Part 1. Now, as we go into this section of Baptist history, I want to remind you, this is not a world history class. All right, so we're not going to talk about explorers like Christopher Columbus or Ferdinand Magellan or Amerigo Vespucci. We're not going to talk about any of those guys because it's not a world history class, it's a Baptist history class. And so if you need to go back and do a little bit of study on how the New World was discovered, let me encourage you to do that. Hopefully you have a fair understanding of that. As we move forward into this as well, this is not an American history class. Now, I'm going to give you some American history here and there just to make sure we're all on the same page on what's going on during this time period, but we're not going to talk about a whole lot of American things, all right, as far as the American history aspects of this. Now, you'll find Baptist history and American history are very much intertwined with each other as we move forward into this, but I want to remind you, it is a Baptist history class, and so we're going to skip a lot of the American history side of it, a lot of the world history side of it, and we're going to focus specifically on the Baptist. Now, as I say that, one of the very first things we're going to talk about moving into this morning is just some basic history about the New World. And so let's dive into that this morning. When the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock on December 20th of 1620, religious peace did seem on the horizon. Religious peace seemed on the horizon, but for a very short time. As many would say, and what is commonly taught, is that the Pilgrims were fed up with having to follow strict religious laws within England and other areas of the quote-unquote old world, and so they decided they would go to the New World and have freedom of religion. That is the common teaching, but what you'll find is that's not necessarily true. About a month after landing, John Carver became the governor at Plymouth Rock, and he appointed several assistants to his cabinet. They passed laws. They initiated trial by jury, which is a great thing. Men were allowed to take part in the affairs of the land if they met the requirements of being able to take part. The requirements were you had to be 21 years old, you had to be a peaceful person, you had to be hardworking, and you had to be orthodox in religion. What you'll find here is they began to merge religion and the religion with the state laws. Yeah. They began to merge religion with state laws. Can you do that and truly have freedom of religion? No. You can't do that and have freedom of religion. By the way, it violates one of the core doctrines of the Bible, the core doctrines of Christianity that we talked about. One of those core doctrines being the separation between the separation of church and the state, in the fact that the church should influence the state, but the state shouldn't have a say in the areas of the church. And so if you were to partake in the government of the area of Plymouth Rock, then you would have to be orthodox in religion. So in order to establish orthodoxy, because then you have to go in and you have to define what does it mean to be orthodox. In order to establish what they meant by orthodox, they established a state church. And so they combined the government with the church, and God's house became a government-run and enforced institution. Let me say that again. They combined government with the church, and God's house became a government-run and enforced institution. Now, as I said, we're not going to deep dive into the basic history. We're focusing on Baptist history, but you need to understand this. So many people are taught, so many people believe that as soon as they landed at Plymouth Rock, there was freedom of religion. That's not true, folks. That's not true. And I'm going to give you the history as we continue through this that is simply not true. They did establish state-run churches that by the way, if you live there, you had to adhere to, or else bad things would happen. History repeats itself. What was happening in England to these people, they began to institute here in the New World. The Puritans and the Separatists, of course, they broke off during the Protestant Reformation, really when England, the Church of England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. You remember when we talked about Henry VIII and his marriage? The Puritans and the Separatists would later break off from the Church of England, and so they landed and they established the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1628, 8 years after the Plymouth landing. They believed, all right, listen closely, they believed heavily in the state-run church in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and kept many, in fact, mostly all of the beliefs of the Anglican Church that the Puritans were trying to purify. So they established the church that went rampantly throughout the colonies, and one that we mentioned in our diagram when we talked about it in the Protestant Reformation, one that became rampant throughout the New World was the Congregational Church. The Congregational Church was really something that took off here in the New World, especially within the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And when they established this Congregational Church within the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they established it with several standards. Number one, they established it by law. It was a law-run institution. Number two, all citizens were taxed to support the Congregational Church. Number three, all citizens were required to conform to the beliefs of the Congregational Church within the Massachusetts Bay Colony. All citizens had to conform to its belief. Number four, no other churches within the Massachusetts Bay Colony were allowed. They weren't allowed. They enforced these laws by fine, imprisonment, beating, scourging, banishment, and or death. And some are going to say, Josh, that is simply not true. When people landed in the New World, they had freedom of religion. They were allowed to serve whatever God they wanted to. Not when you go back and study history. When you go back and study history for what truly happened, folks, there were state-run churches. They were established by law. Citizens were taxed to support them, whether you like it or not. All citizens had to conform to its beliefs, and no other churches were allowed. They enforced these things, as we just mentioned. They enforced them by fine, by imprisonment, by beatings, by scourgings, by banishment, and or death. This was happening in the New World, and you say, no, you're destroying my wonderful view of the New World history. Freedom of religion, you're destroying it for me. I'm not trying to destroy it for you. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. That's what you want, right? You want the truth. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony really based out of Boston, and then we have the Plymouth Rock Colony, and these colonies are going to move forward and continue to grow. Now, as far as the Massachusetts Bay Colony and their Congregationalist Church, you're going to find at least 14 cases of banishment. You're going to find 14 cases of banishment in just the Massachusetts Bay Colony alone, and they were issued within the very first year of its establishment on religious grounds. Not on civil grounds, not on criminal grounds, but on religious grounds. They passed 14 cases of banishment in the first year. And if a banished person returned, somebody who was kicked out of the colony, they were taken to the edge of the colony, said, good riddance, good luck, God bless you. Don't come back. If the banished person returned to the colony, typically they would be put to death. More often than not, they would be put to death. This is the scene I want you to see as we are here in the New World. And you say, this is your favorite time period moving forward into Baptist history? Yeah, it is. I love it. For me, it is so much closer to me because I've been through Massachusetts. I've been through the New England states. I've been to New York. I've been to Maine. As missionaries, we travel a lot. I've been to Washington and Washington, D.C. I've seen the sites. I've seen the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. I've seen the White House. I've seen a lot of these different sites. And to me, it's more personal. Because one day, as you know, this new world is not going to be called the New World anymore. It's going to be called America. And folks, America has a very, very dear place in my heart. I love America. Is she hurting? Absolutely. Is she broken? Absolutely. Is she going the wrong way? Absolutely. Oh, but this is a land that I love. I come from a military family, per se. My grandfather on my mother's side served in the military. My dad's dad served in the military. My dad served in the military. I have a lot of distant family members who served in the military. And so America means a lot to me. I appreciate those who have sacrificed their lives to give us the freedoms that we now hold. And so one day this new world is going to become America, and it means so much more to me. It connects to me. I love the story of Balthasar Hubmaier over there in Switzerland. But let's just be honest, folks. I've never been to Switzerland. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know the sights. I can picture it, and I can look at pictures, and I can envision it, but it's not as personal. But when we get here to the new world, I don't know about you, but for me it just, quote, brings it close to home, as the phrase says. And this is what was happening in the New World during this time period. There were state-run churches, and you had to follow them. And so as we move forward, so far up to this point, we have followed the Baptist people really as far as an entire quote-unquote denomination. We followed the entire denomination through history. We've pointed out a couple men here and there, but mainly we've just been following the entire Baptist people groups. And so now as we move forward into the New World, you're going to find we're not going to talk so much about the entire Baptist faith as a whole. We're going to talk about very specific men as we move forward. And so I'm excited today to move forward with one of our very first men. We're not going to be able to talk about everything about him, but a man did arrive on the scene, and he would cause a great ruckus among the colonies. He was one of the very first. Some refer to him as the first Baptist to arrive in the New World. I don't know that we actually know for sure, but he was one of the very first, nonetheless, if not the first. He was born in Wales around 1600, and his name was Roger Williams. Roger Williams. He was born in Wales, as I mentioned, around 1600, and he moved to London, where famous lawyer Sir Edward Coke took him under his wing. And so Edward Coke was very influential in the life of Williams. He was an attorney, and so he had a great influence on Williams. In fact, he gained him entrance into the University of Cambridge. And I mean, just a big man of influence, and really influenced Roger Williams, who was studying to be an attorney. He was studying to be a lawyer. And so it was during this time that God began to work on his heart, though. He began to form some beliefs about the Bible during these times. One of those things being the freedom of religion. As he was there studying at the University of Cambridge, he was studying a bunch of different things to become a lawyer, but one of those things was history. And he began to realize, you know what this world really needs? It needs true religious freedom, where the state doesn't run the church, where the people can serve whatever God they want. By the way, that is what God wants. All right, God gives you a free will to be able to choose if you're going to serve him or to serve something else. I say something, it's not really somebody, because most of the times it's not real, but God gives you the ability to serve something else. You have to choose. God gives you a free will. And Joshua said, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether it be the God of the Amorites or the God of your fathers. And not Joshua me, but Joshua from the Bible said that. God wants you to have a free will. And so you'll find within the life of Roger Williams, God was working on his heart to really just integrate that belief into his heart that man and countries should have freedom of religion to be able to form their beliefs for themselves. And so though we don't have a time or a date of his salvation, many believe that during this time, as he's coming out of the University of Cambridge, many believe that during this time is when he got saved. That's when he references just that time of being born again. We don't have a specific date or time written down, but many believe this is when he got saved, and this is when he often pointed back to in his writings. And so you'll find that as he got saved, Baptist is a people group that began to have a very heavy influence on Williams during this time, because they held, by the way, to that same belief that there should be freedom of religion. And so, being offered a pastorate in the New World, he and his wife left for the colonies. And so he left Cambridge and decided to become a pastor, a clergyman. And so he arrived in Boston on February the 5th of 1631. 1631. He was immediately met, though, by really what was no freedom at all. Upon sailing, he thought they would have freedom of religion, but that really was not the case. Upon arrival in the New World, he began to preach very, very loudly the gospel and condemn the heresies of the new Congregational Church. There were 4 things in particular that the Congregational Church were ordering that you do during this time, as well as the government across the sea, and he began to preach very loudly against them. I want you to know what they are. Number 1, he began to preach against the Common Book of Prayer. The Common Book of Prayer. The Common Book of Prayer was heavily used within the Congregational churches, but it was composed of Anglican prayers used in Anglican churches, and Williams preached against it heavily. Williams preached against it. He said they shouldn't use a book of prayers by a religion that we know is false. They shouldn't use a book of prayers. By the way, that is vain repetitions to use a book of prayers where you just repeat a prayer. Not only that, he began to preach against the oath of the freeman. The oath of a freeman, which came about in about 1635. And so this was an oath, by the way. On the surface, it appeared to be good. It appeared to be great. In fact, when you look up, if you were to type in Google the oath of a freeman, you would find just great and wonderful things written about it, because on the surface, it looks like a wonderful thing. Basically, what the oath of the freeman was, is you declared yourself a free man with others, and you broke the dominance and the loyalty to England. You were now a free man. You were declaring your freedom. It was kind of like a pre-declaration of independence, per se. While this sounded good, the other part was you declared freedom but pledged allegiance to the civil and religious laws of New England. Well, what were the religious laws? Well, you had to be a member of the Congregational Church. How did you become a member of the Congregational Church? Through infant baptism or by following their faith. That's right. So yes, you were declaring yourself free from England, but you were pledging allegiance to really a false religion. And so Roger Williams preached against it. In fact, he was taken to court over his preaching on this subject. He was taken to court April 30th of 1635 for preaching against the oath of a freeman. Number 3, Roger Williams began to preach against the law of patents. The law of patents. This was a law passed by kings that any lands discovered by their explorers could be laid claim to by said king. Williams didn't believe that. He said, no, the true owners of the land are the natives. What we now know them as the Native Americans. Williams said that the Native Americans, they own the land, and they ought to be fairly compensated for it. They ought to be paid for it. You just can't go in and rip it from their hands and say it's yours. You need to pay them for it. He began to preach against the law of patents. And then number 4, he began to preach against the enforcement of the first table of the law. The enforcement of the first table of the law. You say, what is that? Well, the court believed, the civil court of the government, believed that it was their responsibility to enforce the first commandment upon the citizens. What is the first of the 10 commandments? All right, it's thou shalt have no other God before me. It's man's individual responsibility to God. You won't have any other gods before me. And so the civil court, the government, took it upon themselves to enforce this law and make it so you cannot serve any other god. Williams disagreed with this. He believed that each man was created free and shouldn't be punished if they chose to not be religious or to follow the Congregational church. He said, why are we doing this? Why are we punishing people if they choose not to follow the God that our government wants them to follow? They should be able to pick and choose whatever they want to follow. But you'll find, under the enforcement of the first table of the law, punishment for those who violated this moving of the government. Well, they were imprisoned, they were banished, their property was confiscated. Sometimes they were even put to death. And so this was all going on in Boston. The fire was getting a little hot, and so Roger Williams decided it would probably be best to move on for a little bit, so he went to Salem. He went to Salem, and he took the pastorate of a separatist church that was Baptistic in beliefs, and God began to work mightily. But the Bay Colony, you'll find, would not let him rest. And for the sake of him and his family, he fled to the Plymouth Colony, which was out of the control of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They didn't like him, but it was in vain. In October of 1635, only 4 years after arriving, Roger Williams was banished from both colonies and run out of them. Not allowed to come back. Alone, he was forced into the wilderness. Wild animals, cold snow, no food, no weapons were his accompaniment, not including the Indian tribes that inhabited the areas. He's kicked out. October 1635, dead of winter in New England, moving forward into the winter of New England. By the way, during the same year, this isn't a single incident happening in the colonies. During the same year, John Smith, a Baptist of Providence, was banished as well for, quote, dangerous opinions. The courts then sent a letter to the church at Salem where Williams had pastored, and they sent this letter, I quote from the letter that they sent, quote, refrain all such disorderly assemblies and pretended church meetings, and either to conform themselves to the laws and orders of this government being established according to the rule of God's word, or else let them be assured that we shall, by God's assistance, take some such strict and speedy course for the reformation of these disorders and preventing the evils which may otherwise ensue, as our duty to God and charge over his people do call for from us. This document is signed by governor and deputy. That was the letter they received. They said, you better stop or we'll take some quick course to correct you. Ezekiel Holliman of Salem in 1638 was forced to appear before the court for not going to the public assemblies, for not going to the Congregational church, and for spreading this, quote, heresy of the Baptists. He was severely punished, banished. You'll find Thomas Painter was whipped nearly to death, in July of 1644 because he refused to have his infant baptized by the Congregational church. The story of Roger Williams was not a singular happening during the colonies, folks. This was happening all over the place. So far, you've seen banishment. So far, you've seen 2 banishments, that of Ezekiel Holliman and Roger Williams. You've seen the whipping almost to death of Thomas Painter because he refused to have his infant baptized. And why is it that you believe there was freedom of religion in the New World? Now, I understand. For most people, this isn't something taught in public schools, okay? In fact, I don't even know that they teach any of this anymore in public schools. This isn't something taught in even some Christian schools necessarily. I'll be honest with you, when I grew up, I was homeschooled, and we used a very predominant homeschooling curriculum. I never knew that there wasn't freedom of religion. I was the same as you. I thought, hey, now when the Pilgrims landed, there was freedom of religion for all. And then God worked on my heart about studying out Baptist history, and when I studied it, I realized, wait a second, there was not freedom of religion for all. Not for the Baptist. There's no freedom of religion. Not when people are getting banished for their religious beliefs. That's not freedom. Not when people are getting severely punished for their beliefs. That's not freedom of religion. Not when people are almost getting whipped to death simply because they say, you know what, I'm not a Congregationalist, so I'm not going to have my infant baptized. Getting whipped to death because of that belief, folks, is not freedom of religion. This is the reality of the New World. The reality of the New World. And so as we move forward for this episode today, we're going to leave Roger Williams banished, alone, in the quote as he would write, a miserable, cold, howling wilderness. But let me tell you something. God had put on Williams' heart already, as this banishment took place, God had put on Williams' heart something that would come to sight. It would aid him and allow him to literally survive the winter. I don't know about you, but you get stuck out in the snow and you have nothing, you're not going to survive very long. But there was something God had put on his heart quite a while ago, and he had already been working on, and it would literally rescue him from certain death in the cold snows of New England in October. You say, what is it? What is it that he had done that would really save his life? Well, you'll have to come back next week to find out, because we're out of time for today. But come back next week, join him next Thursday. Yes, a whole week away. I feel like one of those old TV shows. Tune back next time to find out what happens to Superman. One of these old shows. So tune back next time to hear what happens to Roger Williams in the cold snow of New England in October 1600s. And God is going to do something with this man. God would work through him. But you have to come back next week to find out. And so while you're waiting for the episode, let me encourage you, keep looking up and keep stirred up for the cause of Christ.